This semester, we have learned a lot of different concepts and theories and read a lot of papers, a lot of which were very over my head and very dense, but persevere and overcame. However, I think my favorite was the psychoanalysis section for a few reasons. One, I got to read Nabokov's Lolita, which is a book I've always wanted to read. And of course, when I was young and ambitious in high school, it was one of those books I always said I read, but never read. But when I actually got to actually read it, um, 32 years later, I was blown away. I was blown away. It's incredible. It's a dark story. It's a cruel story, um, but it's written in such a way. Nabokov is so good at it. He writes in such a way where it's like this overlay of well written vocabulary and scenery, and it just feels really classy to read. But the subject matter, all in all, is a pedophile. However, one of the assignments we got to do was doing psychoanalysis. And I think that really helped me get through the book because it is a hard book to read and it is very tragic, especially with everything going on today. Um, so having the psychoanalysis idea, you know, I can look at Humbert Humbert's character and I can highlight throughout all of it. I mean, it's littered with highlights and all these different annotations I didn't think I would be doing without that assignment. I didn't think I would psychoanalyze a narcissistic pedophile this semester, and that was so fun. Not because I enjoy those things, but you're really working your brain muscle. I've never worked my brain muscle that way before, and to learn about narcissism in a way of a well-written character like Humbert Humbert and the fragmentation of his character and how devious and insidious he is. Um, Throughout, minute details that I wouldn't have been able to point out without the concept of psychoanalysis and learning about Freud and all that. I've known about Kraft Ebing through my works with the Marquis de Sade, um, but to put it into action was very fun for me. It was very good, and I grew as a reader. I grew as an analysis person, I guess. I don't know. I just felt really smart, and I patted myself on the back for finding those things out about Humbert Humbert, and not accepting his behavior, but putting forth why his behavior is, and is it relevant today? Do we see these things today? The idea that what was it that every case is the same is false because you can have many narcissists, but each of them are narcissistic in their own way. Humbert Humbert is narcissistic because he is so delusional that he thinks he's this one way. He's perceiving himself one way where the world is not really perceiving that. And Nabokov does it so expertly. He just shows his insanity in these slight little sentences that you're like, oh, this dude is crazy. Edgar Allan Poe, in contrast, he makes it full frontal. He's full Monty on the insanity, and that character's crazy by the cadence and how it's written. Well, Humbert, you kind of have to dig a little more, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without, you know, learning about Freud and psychoanalysis and all of that and applying it. And applying it to Humbert Humbert was a real treat. It really was. And I find myself a stronger reader because of it. And I know it's a controversial book. I know it's an ugly subject matter, but I highly recommend it, um, especially if you're interested in psychoanalysis. He is an incredible case study because he is so delusional in his way of thinking that he really thinks he's not hurting anyone. Where you read, he's literally hurting a little girl. He's killed. He's the mother he didn't really kill, but he killed her. and then just kidnaps her daughter and doesn't give the child a chance to grieve. It's all about him and how he can, hide away from the world with his nymphette and, do gross things to her while she's a child trying to cope and trying as a reader to balance out like this is crazy. This is why isn't he looking at her as I'm looking at her, which is a 12-year-old child, and you have to like remove yourself and your ideologies and challenge, and it's very challenging to be looking at through Humbert and not really empathizing, but understanding the scope of his insanity. I don't empathize with him, but I understand his psychoanalysis, I guess you could say, of where he's coming from. This is a crazy man with these traits. He's narcissistic, he's cruel, he doesn't like animals, he's a pedophile, all these little things. So I really enjoyed the psychoanalysis. However, I do think it shouldn't be the only way to look at books because I mean you can psychoanalyze everything and through that you might miss the point of the story. For Lolita, I think it's the point. It's a very good book to psychoanalyze, analyze. But other works, you kind of lose the enjoyment out of certain stories of fiction that way. If you psychoanalyze everything you read, you're not going to enjoy it. Maybe your second read you could try it out, but there's many ways to analyze a piece of literature and interpret it. And for me, as not a fan in the beginning of psychoanalysis, because it's something being in a rehab facility, I was fairly familiar with. I didn't want to, rehash all that. It's a touchy subject matter, and there's a lot of mental illness, and everybody's very sensitive about it, and I don't want to touch on anyone's toes. But applying it to a piece of literature and a well written piece of literature was very enjoyable for me and really, really made me grow as a person and a reader. So that was my favorite part of this class. And also the paper I wrote, I was very proud of as well. I really put in a lot of work I didn't think I would be putting in. So, a lot of good came out of it. My strengths as a student was better. My strengths as a reader was better. And at the end of it, even if I didn't do that assignment, I still got to read an incredible piece of literature that is one of the most controversial pieces of literature. And I love controversial literature. I love banned books.